the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And I'm actually tuning in from my home office today, which is situated on land adjacent to the Bow River, which has shaped this land and its people for generations. If you're joining us from outside of Calgary today or outside of Southern Alberta today and would like to acknowledge the traditional territories where you are, please feel free to share with us in the chat. For those of you who have tuned into an Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise session before, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. This is truly an Ask Me Anything style event with no formal agenda beyond offering answers to your questions about social entrepreneurship and sharing other resources you might consider. That said, we rely on audience questions to drive the session's content. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it into the chat now, and we'll get started after some brief panel introductions. I know we had a number of questions submitted ahead of time too, so we'll be sure to address those as well. But if you're on the call today and want to drop those in the chat, we can queue those up. There's really no silly questions, so please, don't be worried. If there's something you want to ask, please go ahead and ask. We'll invite you to unmute to ask your question to the panel, but if you'd prefer I read out the question right from the chat, that's great too. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our panel today. We've got Brittany with us from the Trico Charitable Foundation. Brittany's manager of social entrepreneurship, training, and funding at the Trico Charitable Foundation. We've got Dan from the Trico Charitable Foundation here with us as well. Dan's the executive director. Meredith, community manager, strategy and engagement at Innovate Calgary's Social Innovation Hub. We've got Philip joining us from Momentum. Philip is the community enterprise coordinator there. And joining our panel for the first time today, a warm welcome to Ryan, who is program director at the TELUS Community Safety and Wellness Accelerator. I think a couple of folks that had kind of reached out with a question ahead of time are on the call today. Harry, do you want to kick us off with your question about transitioning kind of a research project into social enterprise?
No, I'm happy to introduce it. Apologies, everyone. I will keep my camera off. I'm working remotely from a vehicle today, so there's not an awful lot happening in the background anyway. I manage a research project that is funded. The funds reside at the University of Calgary. It was funded by a group of Canadian philanthropic foundations with some additional money coming from the National Science Foundation. We had a 3-year program of work, which we are coming into the last year of. And whilst the project is having some successes, the landscape for funding is becoming more and more competitive. And my concern is that the project will grind to a halt, as research projects do once it runs out of funding. The research project itself is, we're operating a containerized agriculture system north of 60 in a remote and rural setting and exclusively off renewable energy, serving about 30 kilos of fresh produce a week to remote and indigenous communities around Kluane Lake in southwest Yukon. And so we hit a number of different goals for the project, which is enhancing food security, improving local health outcomes, increasing capacity of local people to grow their own food and engage in the technology advantages of hydroponic systems. And so the goal is to try and transition the research project to a social enterprise, because as a northern remote small scale agricultural business addressing food security and health outcomes, I feel like there are going to be more funding streams, both at a territorial and federal level for us. So how do you transition a research project to a social enterprise? Please.
I was like, this sounds like a really great Innovate question.
I was, Henry, frantically taking notes as you were speaking there. So I work with Innovate Calgary, which is sort of serves a number of different roles, but one of the primary, of course, the tech transfer and commercialization office of the University of Calgary. And so we do work a lot with researchers and academics who are looking to transition, their academic research into social enterprise or social innovation through the Social Innovation Hub. I think even just looking at the number of notes that I've taken in your short explanation, there are a number of pieces to kind of think through here. And so our typical, like when we're working with researchers who are interested in this, there's sort of, we sort of think about like the origins of the research, if there's any sort of like IP component of it that we need to support researchers in thinking through. So we would always have kind of like a more in-depth conversation around those pieces. But in addition to that, I think like some of the development pathways, even with like a research origin, are quite similar to the development pathways that exist in other, with other origins or like in community settings, in that we're looking at like, okay, is there a business model here? And so, what are the research pieces that we need to put around like designing a business model itself as well? And then the other piece is just like there are a lot of Innovate Calgary is kind of well networked in this space. So like supporting folks to connect with, whether there's like academic and industry partnerships that they should be aware of, or, different community connections that we can put folks in contact with. And so, yeah, I'd encourage, I'm happy to like follow up and have a more in-depth conversation, and certainly have colleagues who like the majority of my role is sort of like community facing, and then I have colleagues who work really specifically with academic researchers, and so happy to like connect you with them for a further conversation too.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, that sounds super helpful.
Brittany, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think that was exactly what I was thinking of. I know that Innovate's probably the best placed to help researchers with kind of that transition, or what that transition could look like, or if it's even possible.
Ryan, do you have an organization that's doing this that you've created? And if so, do you mind saying what the legal structure is in terms of, is it charitable? Is it for-profit, not-for-profit?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So the project was kind of conceived and ran out of the Arctic Institute of North America, which is based at the University of Calgary, but has its own federal not-for-profit status. And so the initial cut of the idea, although, this is a pretty open process right now because we're trying to work out how to do it, would be to park the social enterprise within that federal not-for-profit. But if we have to do it differently, or we have to establish our own something or other, then again, we haven't made any decisions on that front. At the moment, the funding that we have, the funding agreements that we have with people that have supported the project up to this point have been through the Arctic Institute of North America. And so an initial scan of kind of the legalese in this space, recognizing that I have absolutely no expertise either to review it, suggested that you can put social enterprises in not-for-profits without too much of a burden. So that was the kind of direction we were going. And of course, then the project's also got a 3-year working relationship with that institute. So we know what's going on.
For sure. I was just asking because Trico Foundation is a private foundation. So we're only allowed to fund charitable entities. So if you had been charitable, we might have been able to help you with some of the funding as you transition to social enterprise. I wouldn't mind hearing more about what you're doing. So it's not an exact fit, but you never know for similar areas and synergies and sharing learnings. But I believe the Laurier team for Enactus just won first place nationally, and what they're looking at is modular homes for northern communities. So that, again, it's not a direct fit, but you might be able to share some learnings and what their process is for commercializing that.
Yeah, and everything that we have been doing within our project, we committed right from the get-go was going to be completely open source. Like we publish everything, we have the data for everything. We have been in a fortunate position to share it with half a dozen different communities and First Nations now across Yukon and BC who are trying to get a similar growing operation going to support them. And this was part of the goal of the project, was that we bought a southern system and we've parked it in the north, and we wanted to see what the implications of that are. Because the numbers that companies will sell communities and other organizations, these systems are based again on southern economics, not on northern. So our goal, our role we see for the project is to be able to share that information.
That's wonderful. Is it Smart Ice is another, Brittany, another kind of social enterprise that's working with northern communities? That one is about using technologies to provide early warnings about thinning of ice. So that might be another possible one. They themselves are actually looking.
I'm aware of Trevor's work. Yeah,
Perfect.
Smart Ice is an incredible project.
Of the more national collaborations you're talking about, are any charitable organizations involved in that?
We don't have any charitable organizations involved right now beyond the as I mentioned, the philanthropic families and foundations that have supported us initially.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for the additional information.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
And it was Henry, right? You got called every single name under the book there, Henry. And so
Harry for short, though, right?
Sorry.
I didn't make that up, right? That you're Harry for short.
No, you're completely right. Officially, I am Henry.
Okay, good, because and we also got called Brian, so we're.
No.
I just wanted to apologize.
No, please, no apologies. No apologies needed. It's a quirk of my parents, not of mine, but I continue to honor it.
Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, and I will facilitate those intros just following the call here, so that Harry, we can action kind of some of these next steps and next conversations for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you everyone for your support. This has been some really good information. Thank you.
And then I think there was a question in the chat. Terry, would you like to unmute and turn your camera on, or not turn your camera on, but unmute to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it?
The organization that I'm involved in is Imagine Citizens Network, which is working for healthcare advantages and healthcare initiatives in the province of Alberta, and looking at bringing a new initiative into, first of all, Alberta, probably Canada, that has been operating for a number of years in Britain. So we've discussed with them to bring this to Alberta and trying to sort out the structure that we would bring that venture into Imagine. And so one of the options certainly is to create a social enterprise. And so there's, I think, a relatively simple social enterprise structure that would facilitate that. But there are a lot of questions about the what ifs, and a lot of questions about what about doing it that way? Why do we need to do this? And so to a certain extent, largely my question is, what are the advantages of creating a separate social enterprise structure within Imagine Citizens Network to run the Care Opinion operation?
So I always have to jump in on these questions, because the really important thing to get across is that we are not lawyers. And so nothing we can say can be taken as legal advice. And so you kind of hit a little bit of a area where we don't talk too much about, because the best thing is probably to speak to a lawyer and an accountant about your specific situation. But I can give you a little like high level some information. So there's actually no specific legal structure for social enterprises. They fit sort of all along the spectrum. And there's also different allowances in terms of what can be done in the social enterprise space related to whether you have charitable status or you are a straight not-for-profit organization. So charitable an organization that has charitable status. So you don't. Yeah. So an organization that has charitable status does have some options around related businesses available to them that not-for-profits don't specifically have the same piece. And so we always talk to organizations about the importance of talking to a lawyer. And the main thing is really figuring out what your goals are and what you're hoping to do with it, and then choosing a structure that's going to be the best fit for you, whether it's as a for-profit entity, a not-for-profit entity, something that exists within your current entity, if that's allowable, and figuring those pieces out. So we always say form follows function. So you want to kind of figure out the function, what the goals are of that, and then figure out the best legal structure or structure that makes sense for your organization. And so not-for-profits, it's a little less clear compared to if you had charitable status about different structures that you can create. If anybody wants to add to that, I think Dan might.
Yeah, Terry, actually Integra.org has some, I think, tools as well as videos that discuss options. So we'll put that in the post. Sorry?
We've talked to them and gone through their exercise in terms of structural recommendations. So I think we're 75% there in terms of what we want to do and how we want to do it. There's just continue to be questions from people who might not be quite as familiar with corporate structures. And so concerned about, well, why do we have to do it that way? What about doing it this way? And that was to a certain extent the essence of my question in terms of what are some of the other options that we could consider and why aren't we doing those? And so, I think you've given me some of the information in terms of I like the form follows function sentence that should be helpful in guiding everybody to come to the same conclusion. And so thank you for that. And Jessica, if I may, I have a follow-up question that I would ask.
Please.
Sorry,
not on the chat, if I may. Sorry, go ahead.
Just before you do that, two more things to consider. One is also look at, if you're thinking about possible funders, we found in our experience, there's some funders, especially from the social side, get really nervous if you were a for-profit structure. And there's some funders from the for-profit structure that get really nervous if you're not for profit. So you have to also think through a couple of steps ahead in terms of if you think you're going to be wanting some type of funding, what kind of legal structure will they be most comfortable with? And then the final thing I'd mention, the Trico Foundation, we're a huge believer in talking to those who've been there, done that. So if you have some other organizations that you know of who are kind of similarly placed in terms of social issues, look at what structure they've picked and ask them what their experience are. And there's nothing better in kind of addressing concerns. If you could say, here's two other organizations we've talked to, they've been doing the not-for-profit structure or the separate not-for-profit structure. Here's how it's really worked for them. Here's some red flags we can now think of and really advance and empower the conversation. So something for you to keep in mind there.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, is to be able to point to some of the other organizations that are functioning the way we're intending to function. That's great. Thank you.
And Terry, hi. I'll just add to that exact point, which is that here in Edmonton, which is where our accelerator is based, the Islamic Family Services Association is doing that. They've come up with that sort of model. So they were part of our accelerator with a for-profit spinoff that was housed within their nonprofit. So that might be a really interesting conversation to have with them about their experiences, because they're getting close to launching that product in market now as well, under the umbrella of their nonprofit. So I'd be happy to make an introduction there for you if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. So I don't know how the best way, Jessica, maybe if you can create that link for me.
I can for sure, Terry. Yeah.
Then we can follow up with them, because I think that's a really good idea to point to what's working in some of the other organizations, and so supporting why we want to go in that direction.
And I would just clarify, like building on what you're hearing too, is when you talk to them, just double check if they have charitable status or they're a not-for-profit without charitable status, because that does impact structure quite a bit.
Yeah, the details of the structure are critical. That you know, for profit, not for profit, charitable, et cetera, all make an enormous difference. And of course, there's now the national not for profit option that needs to be considered as well.
And Terry, if you have a follow-up question, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So if we're going to create a social enterprise within our organization, so what's the ideal governance, not so much legal structure, but governance structure? How do we manage, or how does the board manage that social enterprise? What's the best way to create a governance committee, a management committee, go straight to a CEO? What's the best way for the board to manage that for-profit social enterprise? And sorry, just to go back in some of the questions that you're likely to ask first, and that is, ICN is an Alberta not-for-profit society.
As I'm talking, but I didn't mute. I have to go back to the earlier piece of probably how you're going to do that. Once again, depends on the structure that you decide on. So for example, if you were a charitable organization, charitable organizations have the option of a related business that's almost like nested within their charitable organization, but then also doing a for-profit subsidiary where they're able to potentially move some profit back towards the charitable organization. But there's rules even specific to that. So for example, in that case, the governance structures between the two organizations have to be completely separate from each other. And so those are things that, like, once you kind of figure out, then you'll know kind of what's open to you, and then legally what you can and can't do. I wish it was easier to
Yeah, we're not a charitable, so we're a
yeah, and I'm not,
so.
I don't know enough about the nonprofit society side of things, about what requirements there would be or what options there would be. So
Frankly, it's not a legal question. It's in terms of a management, how best to manage that entity and how best to set up the management structure for the board to control, direct.
Yeah,
advise.
and I'll let you take that. I will say, I'm just trying to say that there could be legal aspects to what you can and can't do as well, I guess, is what I'm just trying to say.
Would anyone have any examples of where they might have seen this kind of like in practice in an organization where, like, I mean, there would be a governing board for the nonprofit society, but what kind of the management of a social enterprise arm might look like in practice? I mean, is that falling under the executive director, which then of course reports to that governing board, or are there examples that we might be able to think of?
I don't actually have specific examples, and if I'd figured out effective board management, my life would probably be a lot happier than it is right now. But there are like basic principles in terms of, a lot is going to just depend on what you sense the needs and desires are of the group. But another big thing is, I find one pitfall is humans, for whatever reason, have a tendency to like debate yes or no, as opposed to kind of listening to the concerns of each and saying, based on those concerns, could we maybe set up an experiment to do something? Another technique we utilize a lot is something called affordable loss. A lot of organizations look at, what do we have to gain by doing something versus, what are we prepared to lose? So there's certain techniques, regardless of what either structure or things, where you can like dig deeper. And another one that we find is very effective is don't just ask for someone's opinion, ask for their analysis, i.e., just don't tell me why you feel something, but don't tell me what you feel, but why you feel it. Let's dig deeper and have those discussions. So you'd be surprised, but just those three basic things may make your life a lot easier with whatever specific structure you follow. So something for you to think about.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
We had another question come in advance, and Terry, I don't know if, is Peter Fenwick a colleague of yours?
Yes.
Oh, there was a question that came in from Peter, and I don't know if Peter has joined us. Peter, I don't think you've joined us today. But I will ask the question in case it's of interest to anyone else. But it is, are we collectively at a point where social enterprise does not have to only mean not-for-profit? otherwise asked, a revenue model to scale impact should not be dependent on charity or government grants. It's a little philosophical for our session today, but I see some nodding heads. I don't know, Ryan, did you want to start us off with a thought there?
I was agreeing that it was philosophical, and it was when I read it earlier, I was like, that's an interesting question, and I know Peter, so I appreciate it. But you know, I hope we are. I hope we're collectively there. But I do think that this is a merging of different worlds, and I think that we have to really, or what I would love to see is conversation around, because there's tension points, right? There's tension between both. Should a social enterprise be for profit? And there's philosophical debates going on around that. I think we can all come to the same table and have a conversation about it. And I would agree with Peter that I hope we aren't. Certainly from our perspective up here in the accelerator world, we're trying to merge those worlds together in a really practical, on the ground kind of way. And I think that coming from the business side, the business development for-profit side, not as an only focus for us, but probably as the historical focus, it gives us a slightly different perspective on the merging of the two than coming from the not-for-profit world. And so the blending of the two is where we actually have this conversation available to us. That's new. And you know, I really, instead of looking for labels and definitives, I agree with what Dan said in principle as well, which is what's possible here. And where do we want to get to? And would we like this to happen? And certainly from my perspective, we would really like this to happen, because I think for sustainability, for social causes, this needs to happen. And so what that looks like and how that operates is still to be determined. And so that's the fun. We're sitting in front of a bit of a blank canvas, right? And that can be scary, but I think that the conversation here is helpful towards it. And that's all that was going through my mind in that moment when I was smiling.
So those are the questions that we received in advance and dropped in the chat today. Is there anyone else that's joined us that might have a question for the panel, or a thought, or another philosophical question to share or to ask rather? Oh, Michaela, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am a research intern at ABC, and I'm helping out with research on just benefiting the ecosystem better and stuff. So I just wanted to ask what kind of research would be most useful at the ecosystem level?
Panelists, feel free to kind of share thoughts there. I mean, what gap we might be able to fill in the ecosystem from a research perspective, but then of course, anyone else on the call, if you have any thoughts, or perhaps a resource that you're seeking and you can't find, that might be a good indication of research we need.
Hey, Michaela, we've chatted about this in person. Oh, sorry, did I cut you off, Meredith? I thought I might actually use my voice for once today. Michaela, yeah, we've chatted about this in person before. I think like something that seems to be like the $1 million question that everyone's trying to like wrap their head around is just around impact measurement, both on an individual and on a collective level. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is just like, what are the stories people care about most? And secondly, what are the best ways to tell those stories? And so I've seen like countless numbers of approaches to this. I've seen a lot of different groups try to have their methodology be the framework that everyone else should follow. And so I think it's just like that. I don't know if there is ever that golden solution to like the impact to measure, but I know it's something that everyone is struggling with, whether it's specifically the quantitative aspects of measuring impact, or whether it's just around telling the narrative and the story from a brand perspective of what you do in community. So I would throw that as my recommendation for some research that we could use some help with.
The thing that came to mind for me was just something that we've been talking a lot about in the Social Innovation Hub at Innovate Calgary, around just like the different pathways to scale social impact or social innovation. And so we see lots of kind of like documentation of these like development pathways of a social innovation that very closely resemble like a company that's like scaling up kind of thing. But we don't often see a lot of like documentation or recognition for, what does it look like to scale social impact through systems change or through culture change or through influencing institutions. And so there is already research that's been done around this to document some of these different development pathways, but like not really in an Alberta context that we've found. And so I think having some like examples of Alberta-based organizations that perhaps like don't follow that kind of like hockey stick growth, or don't follow like a typical organizational structure or a typical development pathway, but are still doing really impactful work, will make social innovation a lot more accessible for different actors who have a lot of potential for social innovation, but perhaps don't see themselves in this ecosystem.
Thanks, everyone. Michaela, would you be key? Would you be willing to kind of share with us the kind of things you are currently kind of working on, or what's on your radar from that perspective?
I'm still very much trying to learn more about the whole fields and stuff. I'm very new to it, so.
Super. Well, then I will not put you on the spot there, but thank you for joining us today. Kira, thank you for your question in the chat, and I'll go ahead and read this out. How can an artist fall in the realm of social enterprise? What sort of outcomes should I work towards? I'm interested in nature, technology, and innovation that combines the two. I have lots of ideas about this, but would love to source some new ones. And that's from Kira in the chat.
I'll jump in. The voice has been unleashed. There's no stopping me now. Hey, Kira, nice to meet you. Part of the reason why I'm jumping in is Be Local and Momentum has partnered with Calgary Arts Development on a couple of different occasions. Last year, we had piloted a program to kind of introduce the concept of entrepreneurship to artists. A lot of artists that we've come across have been averse to the idea of identifying as like a business person or an entrepreneur. A lot of times they view their craft and their artwork as something beyond material gain, about their way of purpose and giving back to the world. And so the idea of mixing in these concepts of profit and financial incentive with some of the artists I've connected with, have kind of been a little bit of oil and water. And so Be Local, when we've partnered with Calgary Arts Development, was to kind of like turn that like narrative on its head. And the entry point into the conversation that we've been seeing some positive response to is, instead of just viewing it as entrepreneurship, but social entrepreneurship. And so one of the things that we've kind of the panel talked about earlier today is this notion of like this intersection, this holistic approach, this combination of seemingly siloed worlds coming together to kind of create this impact in the world. And when I kind of like talk about, business being a tool that really takes into consideration the three spheres of sustainability, the social, the environmental, and the economic, it kind of positions this topic around sustainable livelihoods in this new framework. And so a lot of artists, similar to nonprofits, live and breathe through this grant funding world. And so for some artists, they kick ass at applying for grants, writing grants, and securing grants. And there's other artists, maybe they're new to Canada, maybe for whatever reasons, the grant process isn't what they're well suited for, but they're incredible artists. And so a lot of these artists struggle again with this funding cycle. And so one thing that we've been trying to kind of like introduce to artists is this idea of like getting out of that cycle, or at the very least supplementing some of their grant funding with self-generated income. And there's a lot of amazing artists like in Be Local Network. This is one artist that I just want to highlight really quickly, who has done everything from pet portraits to holiday cards to paintings to recently she's gotten a membership at Fuse 33, a makerspace, and she's been doing some really incredible laser cut artwork that wouldn't have been possible. And so she's just an artist that's really embraced innovation and evolution of her artwork and found a lot of different revenue generation streams above and beyond just the traditional markets. And so I do think this overlap between artists and social enterprise is actually quite intuitive and natural to a lot of artists, especially when it does involve this idea of creating a positive impact. Because a lot of artists, when I do talk to them, they're not doing it, they're not compelled by making a lot of money. At the end of the day, they're compelled to create beauty and put that beauty out in the world that can be appreciated by their neighbors, by their friends and their family. And so that kind of like larger inspiration about more than just financial profit, there's so many parallels that run similar to a social entrepreneur. And so I'll just close off with this one other idea. And Social Venture Institute, it's a gathering that we also host every summer. This is my shameless plug that I always do for it. It's coming up in August. We had amazing turnout of artists last year. So Calgary Arts Development was one of our sponsors. One of our workshops was actually, and this is what I am really proud of, like we had a panel that was just Indigenous artists. And it's like, what is that doing at a conference for business? And there were so many profound learnings going both from the artists and to the artists. And so I think artists very much are a part of the social entrepreneurship community, everything that they do and but what they're inspired by and what they're doing in the world. So many beautiful alignments with social entrepreneurs. And so anytime an artist says they're not an entrepreneur, I'm like, but maybe you're a social entrepreneur. So on that note, I'll shut up and also invite you to Social Venture Institute happening at Métis Crossing this summer, where you're bound to meet a lot of artists doing really innovative work, creating beautiful impact in the world.
Philip, thanks for that. Do you want me to drop the link to that in the chat for Kira?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You got it ready to rock and roll? Thanks.
That's great. You know, as an artist and an entrepreneur myself, I really appreciate everything Philip just said. So I would echo it. And I would also say that mindset, that traditionally these old belief systems we hold collectively have to be worked through and destroyed and destructed and turned into something new, which is this merging. The creativity of an artist and an entrepreneur are synonymous in my mind and in my experience, and they go hand in hand. So the idea that we can blend the two and create social enterprise is perfect. So thank you so much, Philip, for answering that. And in terms of what sorts of outcomes should I work towards, Kira? As an artist to an artist, I would just say, what moves you? What calls to you? Start there with an ideation phase and think about what you want to be your outcome, because you are the master of your destiny in that situation. And then fill in the structure and the pieces to make it into something as a social enterprise would be. And good luck. Keep me posted. I want to see.
There's a lot of incredible examples of possibilities. Sorry, Jessica.
No, go ahead.
One is, and all these examples relate to how art can be used to create the basis for a social enterprise. So one is Coloring It Forward. They focus on reconciliation. So they sell coloring books and other things that embrace and celebrate Indigenous art. Then there's this example from Boston of a woman who wanted to help people who had mental health challenges and isolation. So she created an art program. And then she did some more research and she found that there's actually a lot of art programs for people who are feeling isolated. So instead of yet one more, she actually created this platform so that the people who have now created art can then sell it. So it's called Art Lifting, and it's using tech as well as art to create a platform for sales, and it's doing very, very well. And then finally, I forget the name of it, Brittany may remember, but we have our new student awards. And one of our either finalists or recipients was an artist. And she noticed that a lot of artists were not able to reproduce their paintings in a cost-effective way. There seemed to be kind of a stranglehold on the market. So she's working on developing a technology that allows artists to reproduce more cheaply their art so they can copy it and sell it in a way that they actually take the benefit of the profit. So again, you can see these examples of merging the idea of tech as well as art. So lots of examples out there.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks everyone that's dropping links and more information in the chat. That is great. Philip, I appreciated the shameless plug for your summer programming, and that actually was going to be something I was going to offer to all of our panelists. If I don't think there's any, I haven't seen any more questions come through, but we'll wait a couple minutes here. But maybe while we do, if there's anything coming up that your organizations are offering that you want to share with this community, or resources you want to make available, please go ahead and kind of share with the group now if there's something coming up that you want on people's radar.
A couple things I'm plugging. So we're talking about impact. I think one of the biggest impacts a business can make, especially if you have staff, is paying your staff a living wage. I know it's not something that every business might be equipped or might be in a financial position to do so, but a living wage is a very, very powerful way of creating long-term impact in community through your staff. And so on that note, Be Local, in partnership with the Alberta Living Wage Network, is going to be hosting, I'm calling it a juicy panel discussion on May 30th at Momentum, Momentum being a poverty reduction organization in Calgary. But the idea is to I'm all about peer learning. I'm all about not having talking heads, no offense to us all, the panel, but I'm all about having peers talk about what they're going through and the challenges that they're going through, and then entrepreneurs learning from other entrepreneurs. So this is going to be a killer panel. We've got 4 awesome entrepreneurs, all either paying a living wage, or holistically the total compensation would be equal to a living wage. And so we've got Kevin from Knifeware, we've got Shannon from Righteous, we've got Jan Schill from Home Spritz, and we've got Karen from Dogma. But the idea for this conversation is they actually have differing opinions on the living wage and the struggles and the hardships about it. It's not like pearl, yeah, living wage. It's kind of let's have a real candid convo about how realistic is this? Can everyone do it? What are some of the struggles that they've gone through to do in order to be able to pay that? And so I invite all of you, if you're interested in learning more about a living wage, and learning more about Be Local, and learning more about Alberta Living Wage Network, come on May 30th. And then afterwards, we're going to go to a hole-in-the-wall diner on International Avenue, because I don't do anything normal. We're not doing a regular networking event. We're gonna go it's at Tim's Cafe on International Avenue. If you've never been, it's one of my favorite breakfast joints. And it's a proper hole in the wall. So come digest all that information by eating some food. So just wanted to plug that. And then as well, something else that I just want to drop on the group. I have officially landed my first big keynote for Social Venture Institute, and you're the first people I'm letting you know about this. I've only let my internal team know this afternoon. It's going to be Sona, the Chief Impact Officer from Benevity, who's going to be one of our keynotes. And so I'm so stoked. A unicorn company, born Calgary company that's been doing global impact, helping a lot of businesses and companies around the world scale their impact. And so I'm really, really excited to hear from Sona and her journey and her story about helping grow Benevity to where it is. So I'm really excited about SVI this year. It's going to be at Métis Crossing up north near Smoky Lake. And so it's the first Métis cultural center in the province. And so on just a number of reasons, and Ryan, I got to get you and everyone from Edmonton and all these 20 social enterprise tech companies there as well. But I think it's going to be a really incredible event in the summertime up north at Métis Crossing with some amazing keynote speakers. So hopefully I will see all of you there. I'm done plugging now. I'll let someone else speak. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Philip, and congratulations on everything coming together for the Social Venture Institute in August. That's so exciting when things fall into place like that. Well, and they don't do it without a ton of hard work. So kudos to you. Meredith, anything happening at Innovate that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I'll share a couple of events that we're hosting in the Social Innovation Hub. So the first one I'll share, every month, the first Monday of the month, we host a Social Innovator Breakfast Club. And so this is kind of a informal networking opportunity, chance to start your week off right. set some intentions for the month, maybe. We tried something new at our last one that went over really well. So we had Jenna Galloway come and just share her story as an entrepreneur. Kind of like the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, the ugly, the lessons learned along the way. And it was quite a powerful experience, I think, for the folks who attended. And so we're looking to do something similar for June's event. We've asked Derek Mann with Stagehand to come share his story and some of the things he's learned in his social entrepreneur journey. I'll put the event in the chat. We provide breakfast and coffee, so maybe it makes getting there at 9 feel a little more feasible, for me at least. So I'll put that in the chat. And then one other thing I'll share, we are doing, so Innovate Calgary operates an expert advisor program. We have kind of a roster of advisors that we work with on specific challenges that people are facing in their businesses to kind of get over hurdles, move them forward. We're offering sort of like a free light touch opportunity to engage with the program in the hub. Also at the beginning of June, we have 4 advisors who are going to be stationed at the Social Innovation Hub throughout the week. Folks can book a one-on-one 1-hour meeting with them, provide some materials to them in advance, and they'll support you through, again, a specific sort of like well-defined challenge that you're facing. Right now. So I'll pop the link for that one in the chat as well. I think there's the spots have gone quickly, so I think there's maybe only a few left on that one, but you can check that out in the chat as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Meredith. And last but certainly not least, Brittany, Dan, anything you want to share from Trico?
Sorry, my mouse was not doing what I wanted it to. So I'll just do a little shout out that we have our assessment materials all online, all free, 24/7. So this is for organizations that are looking into social entrepreneurship or wanting to sort of build upon their current social enterprise, really looking at how do we blend together the social and entrepreneurial, some pressure points, things like that. And then also some deep dives into different areas like goal setting. We call it the mountain. So we talk about like, what's the peak? Where do you want to go with it versus where you are now? So there's tons of tools online that, as I said, are available. And just working with organizations around that. And then we have coaching related to those tools. And finally, funding available, but just to charitable organizations, as we are a private foundation with charitable status. And so right now, until maybe new legislation comes into place, we're still working with charitable organizations. Dan, you can jump in if you have anything else.
Sure. Thanks, Brittany. As a funder and a capacity builder, we try to be very intentional about overcoming power dynamics and really being empowering for those that we do our best to assist. As we were aspiring to do that, we found that kind of the heavy hitters internationally in the social impact space, Skoll and Ashoka, had actually come together in something called Catalyst 2030 and created this kind of template as to what funders should do to aspire to those things. And they even actually have created a system where you can go and answer some questions and you get assessed. So to kind of move this conversation forward, we actually shared a blog about us doing this self-assessment and the results and how we feel about them. So we'll put that in the chat for anybody who's interested in this conversation, again, either from capacity builder or funder perspective or as a fundee. And then finally, I had the honor to be a judge on the investment readiness program this time around. And I'd been asked some questions from one of the foundations that had been facilitating the process. So I've now created a blog that provides kind of an inside look as to what I thought the process was, both its challenges and its the progress that it made. So we'll put that in there for anybody that's interested in that program or ecosystem building in general can check it out and hopefully find it insightful. That's it.
Super. Thanks so much, everyone. I see a ton of resources being dropped in the chat, but no further questions. So I will wrap up this edition of Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise now. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. As always, a robust discussion, and we were before we started the session, the panelists were just chatting about how you just never know where the discussion is going to go, and it's always different. And so we appreciate everyone that comes, that shares their questions, shares their feedback. To our panelists, of course, thank you for sharing your energy and your advice and your insights. It's always lovely to have the opportunity to connect, and we will look forward to seeing you. I should have had this prepared. Now I'm skipping ahead to see when the second Wednesday of June, or second Wednesday of June is. Wednesday, June 14th, we'll be here again, and an invitation for that will go out shortly. So to our panelists, thank you, and to everyone who joined us today, thank you, and have a great evening.